Okay, good morning, and thank you for joining our webinar today. I'd like to welcome you to the Caltrans Advanced Mitigation Program's third annual public meeting. My name is Matt Derby with HDR Engineering, assisting Caltrans with the facilitation of today's meeting. Next slide. Before we jump into the presentation, I'd like to go over some ground rules for this online meeting. Attendees are automatically muted upon entry. The chat box will be deactivated throughout the duration of this meeting. The opportunity to comment or ask questions will be made available during the facilitated Q&A session. Participation will be inactive until the Q&A session begins. Instructions will be displayed on screen for you to follow. You'll be able to type questions or comments into the Q&A box, and you can use WebEx's raise hand feature to ask a live question, then wait to be called upon and unmuted. If we're unable to answer questions or run out of time, we will follow up with all Q&A with responses in writing after the event. And as a reminder, today's meeting is being recorded for documentation purposes and will be posted later to the AMP website. If you're experiencing any type of technical difficulties or issues with this WebEx meeting, please call WebEx's help desk at 866-229-3239. Next. And now for today's agenda. The agenda includes a review of the Advanced Mitigation Program, a walkthrough of the AMP process, and an AMP program update. We will have two Q&A sessions built into today's presentation, which attendees will be prompted to ask questions. And after the final Q&A session, we'll return for closing remarks. In addition, we'd like to remind everybody, and we'd like for all attendees to fill out an important online questionnaire to help improve the annual mitigation program meeting, and to also add any additional topics or comments for future presentations. You'll find a link to that questionnaire that's going to be in the chat box. Now, with the first presentation, at this time, I'd like to introduce Karen Rees, Caltrans Acting Senior Mitigation Biologist, for her opening remarks. Karen?
Good morning, and thank you all for your time today. The Caltrans Advanced Mitigation Program is pleased to take a deeper dive into advanced mitigation project delivery, as well as provide an update on progress since the program annual meeting in 2022. Over the last year, the Advanced Mitigation Program has pivoted from nearly 100% planning in the development of regional advanced mitigation needs assessments to more of a 50-50 split with an increasing amount of project delivery workload. It has taken an entire team of amazing professionals to develop this program over the last few years. I'd like to acknowledge the hard work and dedication of the AMP team who has made the progress that we'll share with you today possible. Stuart Kirkham, Karen Loy, Solomon McCrae, Virpul Sidhu, Michael Burleson, and Tony Galindo. I'm going to start with a quick review of the program, then jump into the process of how an advanced mitigation project can move from planning to delivery. Let's begin. Next. I first want to remind everyone of the regulations which both created the Advanced Mitigation Program and provides limitations to it. As a public agency, we must always be fiscally responsible. For instance, Caltrans cannot randomly hand out money to create advanced mitigation projects. There must be a connection made between identified transportation project needs and an advanced mitigation project. The program works like a loan in which the transportation projects must be able to pay back the mitigation acquired through an advanced mitigation project. Funding cannot be spent on any type of mitigation. The Advanced Mitigation Program can only fund certain types of advanced mitigation projects. Next. For those new to this program, there is a planning and delivery process established for Caltrans to follow when creating advanced mitigation projects. The planning process involves 5 main steps that include performing a SAMNA analysis, selecting a potential region of focus, developing the RAMNA, creating and scoping an advanced mitigation project, and ending with obtaining the Caltrans Director's approval for funding and delivering that advanced mitigation project. Next. The delivery process is what this presentation will focus on. It basically involves pursuing an advanced mitigation project as created. This is when all stakeholders are identified, an agreement or contract is created, possibly an enabling instrument is made, and in the end, Caltrans is able to purchase the mitigation they were pursuing. Notice that there is an icon of a person sitting at a computer. I refer to this as step 6.5, and we will see that icon again later. Next. Before I go any further, I want to remind all of you that the Advanced Mitigation Program website has a number of previously recorded presentations if you want to review and/or understand any part of the program further. This presentation will also get posted on that website, so hopefully I do a good job and you can use it as another reference. Next. Again, Caltrans cannot pursue advanced mitigation in any way we want. There are only certain pathways we can use to pursue advanced mitigation credits shown here. They include involvement with natural community conservation plans and habitat conservation plans, conservation banks, mitigation banks, in-lieu fee programs, mitigation credit agreements, and permittee responsible mitigation. Among these pathways, the resource agency ability to participate varies, and we must always keep that in mind. Next. To perform the delivery process walkthrough I promised, we will be looking at just 2 of these pathways involving conservation banks and in-lieu fee programs. One reason we chose banks is that all resource agencies are authorized to participate in banking. Next. First, we must follow the planning steps. In this example situation, our SAMNA analysis is done, the geographic area of interest has been delineated, and the RAMNA has been developed and finalized. We are now on step 4 of the planning process, project scoping. This is where we ask ourselves, what did we learn from our RAMNA? Plenty, right? Next. Here are some of the main pieces of information we learned. Land ownership, potentially impacted resources including connectivity, existing HCPs and NCCPs and their boundaries, potentially available banks and in-lieu fee programs and other existing opportunities. Transportation projects and the Caltrans 10-year plan that could potentially benefit from advanced mitigation. A preliminary estimate of the compensatory mitigation needs of Caltrans transportation projects in the 10-year plan. Conservation goals and objectives, resources that could benefit from advanced mitigation program-funded projects, and resource agencies identified as stakeholders. Now would be a good time to check in with them. Next. At this point, Caltrans chooses transportation projects from the Caltrans 10-year book that need mitigation as was identified in the RAMNA. From those transportation projects, Caltrans identifies and quantifies the total mitigation needed. As a reminder, the 10-year project book identifies transportation projects that are planned for the next 10 years. This book is updated quarterly each year. This can be a very challenging step for Caltrans because staff is basically trying to make a large enough mitigation project that will address the mitigation needs of a handful of transportation projects, all based on estimations of what transportation projects may happen, what their potential impacts are, which environmental regulatory permits should be needed, and how much mitigation will be required by those agencies to offset the permitted impacts. Because transportation projects must be able to pay back the mitigation loan, Caltrans staff must try to create a project that is most likely to succeed. Therefore, advanced mitigation projects are most likely to address common mitigation needs in their districts, such as waters and wetlands and species that they already commonly pursue mitigation for. Transportation projects are also often linear, crossing multiple watersheds and counties. It's possible that an advanced mitigation project may only address mitigation for a part of a transportation project. Also, as we know well in Caltrans, transportation projects rarely stay the same from start to finish. The impact footprint increases or decreases with design changes. Schedules are extended or compressed, and projects can even get shelved for several years. While considering an advanced mitigation project, Caltrans staff must step back and ask themselves this question. If I end up buying too much mitigation through my advanced mitigation project, what are the chances that another future transportation project can use them? The other question, of course, is if I end up not buying enough mitigation, what options will I have? This step takes much time and thought and should not be rushed. From here on out, text in blue will signify the advanced mitigation needs we're following through to exemplify the process. So in this scenario, we're assuming our analysis showed us that we should pursue half an acre of wetlands credits and 20 acres of species credits. Caltrans then decides on the best pathway to pursue those credits based on regionally known information and predictable route. We are not going to make this any more complicated for ourselves, and we also want the best chance of success. In this situation, we have done our research and we found one or more existing in-lieu fee programs with wetland credits we need to satisfy our anticipated transportation project permits. So we determined that the best way to acquire the wetlands mitigation credits is by pursuing existing credits through an in-lieu fee program. When we did the research for our species mitigation needs, we found that there was nothing available for us to use. There were no existing credits to meet our species mitigation needs. So we realized we needed to pursue the establishment of new credits. We therefore determined that the best course of action was to pursue conservation bank credit establishment. Biologists and other staff in Caltrans districts will then write all of this information into a project initiation proposal, a PIP, and submit it to the Caltrans district director for approval to develop the advanced mitigation project further. This PIP will include the following critical pieces of information. Who is the district making this proposal? What transportation projects may benefit from this proposal? What mitigation type and credits are needed? Where are the transportation projects located in relation to the geographic area of interest? When should we expect to meet various milestones, including obtaining the mitigation? Why should this advanced mitigation project get funding? How will Caltrans accomplish this proposal? What pathway will be used? And how much time and money is needed to complete this advanced mitigation project? Next. Here is a map showing an amalgamation of all bank and in-lieu fee program service areas for credits categorized strictly as wetland. It clearly shows the lack of wetland credit opportunities out there for Caltrans districts. As I mentioned before, it's important when scoping an advanced mitigation project to first do the research to see what opportunities are available. Caltrans is responsible for checking known data, verifying type availability and cost, and consulting with the appropriate resource agencies. Where do we get this information? We can confer the Army Corps of Ribbit's website and the CDFW approved bank's website, but it's important that each district keep their own tabs on which in-lieu fee programs and banks and other opportunities are available to them in their own districts. At this point, Caltrans staff cannot openly discuss the actual advanced mitigation project they're working on because 1, it technically doesn't exist yet, and 2, we must always be legally careful of affecting potential competition for purchase of these credits later. This map was created in March. Tools like this completed map must be used with caution since this data may have already changed as banks and programs and their credits come and go. Caltrans staff must keep an updated inventory of what's available throughout the advanced mitigation project process. Our GIS guru, Saul McCrae, currently has the most complete GIS file of all service areas in California. We need in-lieu fee program and bank sponsors to reach out to him in our program for anything new on the horizon and any changes. The district staff who use this information also need to know this information. You should all know which Caltrans districts can use your credits. This has been a Help Us to Help You service announcement. Next. At step 5, the PIP that was signed by the Caltrans district director gets reincarnated into the PID, which then gets reviewed and signed by the Caltrans director. At this point, the advanced mitigation project is approved and funded to proceed, and the district staff that created it is now committed to delivering it. Planning is done. Hopefully you've learned that most of planning is performed by Caltrans staff. Delivery is a different matter. Now on to delivery, what you've all been waiting for. Next. The first step in delivery involves identifying stakeholders of the advanced mitigation project. For the purposes of the advanced mitigation program, stakeholders are defined as individuals or organizations who are actively involved in an advanced mitigation project or whose interests may be affected as a result of advanced mitigation project execution or successful advanced mitigation project completion. Stakeholders will vary depending on the nature of the advanced mitigation project. For our identified mitigation needs, Caltrans had determined that transportation projects would need a 401 and 404 permit, so stakeholders include the Army Corps of Engineers, a regional water quality control board, and one or more in-lieu fee program sponsors. For our species mitigation needs, Caltrans had determined that transportation projects would need a biological opinion and a 2081 permit, so stakeholders include the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and one or more conservation bank sponsors. Next. All right, here it is, the Caltrans staff person sitting at the computer. We are now at the unofficial step number 6.5, contracting through either the Caltrans Environmental Agreements Office or the Caltrans Division of Procurements and Contracts, famously referred to as DPAC. Please note that the contracting pathway depends on the mitigation pathway. For our identified wetlands mitigation needs, we had decided on pursuing in-lieu fee program credits. And for our species mitigation needs, we had decided on pursuing conservation bank credit establishment. They each have their own pathways. Next. All right, don't get scared, it's just a flowchart. This flowchart shows the common pathway for pursuit of existing mitigation credits, whether Caltrans is pursuing bank or in-lieu fee credits. This is specifically the pathway we need for our 0.5 acre of existing in-lieu fee wetlands credits. Remember that the species credits don't exist yet in our fictional scenario, so we cannot use this pathway for those credits. In-lieu fee programs are often overseen by government organizations, so most likely Caltrans will work with the Agreements Office to purchase in-lieu fee credits through an agreement, whereas conservation and mitigation banks are often overseen by private entities, so most likely Caltrans will work with DPAC to purchase bank credits through a contract. If there is only one in-lieu fee program or bank that has what Caltrans needs, we can work directly with the entity because there is no competition present. If there is more than one non-public in-lieu fee program or bank that has what we need, the needs will go out to bid with the lowest bid winning. This bidding process ensures that all entities have a fair chance of winning the bid. With either process, the end result is the same for an advanced mitigation project. Caltrans will have purchased pre-transfer credits. What are pre-transfer credits, you ask? They are simply advance credits, credits that are bought before they are transferred or applied to specific permit needs. At this point, we have no permits in hand. we are pursuing mitigation before the transportation projects have permits. Thus, these credits are pre-transfer. This is the correct terminology, so now is a good time to start using it. And that's it. Steps 6.5 to 10 are done, and we have our 0.5 acre credits of wetlands mitigation. These credits will get logged in our Steve database and will be applied towards our transportation projects. For this process to be successful for advanced mitigation projects, the following must occur. The in lieu fee program or bank must be active, have relevant agency signatories, sell relevant credits, have sufficient credits released. The enabling instruments must allow for sale of pre-transfer credits. There are interested and qualified bidders within the initial advertised period to keep on schedule, and Caltrans has programmed sufficient funds to buy the credits. Please note that this process is the same for advanced mitigation projects as well as transportation projects. The difference lies in that bolded bullet, which is the only requirement specific to advanced mitigation projects. An enabling instrument must allow for the sale of pre-transfer credits, which means an in lieu fee program or bank must have amended its current enabling instrument, or it started up immediately with the ability to do so and is ready to sell pre-transfer credits right now. Next. We are now moving on to the pathway for pursuit of credit establishment. In this situation, no existing in lieu fee programs or banks have what we need, so we must find a contractor to make them. To pursue our 20-acre species credit needs, we must follow the request for proposal process, in which Caltrans submits a form package to DPAC, who puts it out for bid. This submittal package includes a number of items, including a scope of work that describes exactly what Caltrans needs a contractor to perform for its advanced mitigation project. For our scenario, Caltrans needs 20 species credits, but that's not enough information. The RAMNA must serve as a reference and guide. At the least, the RAMNA's geographic area of interest must be identified as a boundary for these credits. Other parameters, such as U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service recovery areas and watersheds, may be necessary to include. The scope of work should also state which resource agencies need to approve the credits. And of course, Caltrans staff must know the deadline of obtaining these credits in order to meet the needs of the benefiting transportation projects. There will often be multiple deadlines. For instance, if our 20 species credits will provide mitigation for 4 transportation projects, those transportation projects will most likely all be on different construction schedules. In this situation, a scope of work may require 2 credits by April 2026, 10 credits by June 2026, 5 credits by June 2027, and 3 credits by December 2028. It will be up to the contractor to figure out the best way to address these needs to meet those deadlines. If a contractor can establish, release, and sell all 20 credits to Caltrans by that earliest date needed, that's even better. Scoring criteria are created for each advanced mitigation project to rate proposals received. Caltrans wants a contractor who is most likely to be successful in establishing the advanced mitigation credits it needs. Scoring criteria are developed before an RFP goes out to bid because it provides a means for which every proposal received gets an unbiased review. A Caltrans evaluation committee is created for each advanced mitigation project and uses its scoring criteria to rate proposals coming in. The Caltrans evaluation committee votes and ultimately decides who gets the contract. Non-voting members are technical experts that include Natural Resource Agency partners. For purposes of our 20 species credit needs, we had already realized that our credits would need to be approved by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and California Department of Fish and Wildlife, so there should be at least one representative from each of those agencies, possibly a Caltrans liaison. You may be wondering why Natural Resource Agency partners can't vote. If you are in a position to affect the outcome of the advanced mitigation project, then you cannot vote. This includes being able to approve or deny enabling instruments or permits. These are Caltrans projects funded by our program. The Caltrans Evaluation Committee considers feedback from its identified non-voting members, and a contractor is chosen based on the superior bid. For just this part of the pathway to succeed, the RFP forms must capture everything critical, reducing risk as much as possible. Critical forms include the scope of work and scoring criteria as described earlier. There needs to be an appropriate cost estimation. There must be interested and qualified bidders within the initial advertised period to keep on schedule, and we need non-voting members to provide valuable and timely feedback. Are we done with this pathway? No, we only completed step 6.5. Next. Steps 7 to 10 involve the actual establishment of credits. Much of this work will occur between the contract winner and the appropriate resource agencies, but Caltrans will need to manage the contract and perform reviews along the way. Strange as it may seem, the end result for bank credit establishment is the same as that of pursuing credits from an existing bank. Caltrans will have purchased pre-transfer credits. For success for steps 7 to 10 of this pathway, the contractor is able to meet needs on time to find and buy appropriate land, survey land which may need seasonal surveys, identify necessary credit potential, and achieve all environmental clearance. Agency approval of the following must occur and within necessary time limits for land choice, prospectus submittal checklist, enabling instrument package, credit establishment, and credit releases. If this pathway goes smoothly, in the end, we will have our credits in hand. They will get logged in our Steve database and will be applied towards our transportation projects. So, what could possibly go wrong? Next. This is a risky pathway. There are a number of potential delays and snags that could impact the credit establishment pathway. Here is a list of situations that could impact the credit establishment process. One versus more properties involved, land with resource type conversions, upstream or downstream land issues, weather delaying the survey schedule, a landowner that backs out, existing easements or restrictions exist on the land, whether this is an amendment to an existing in lieu fee program or bank or a new one, novel and or complex credits are needed, large or small service areas being pursued, one or more service areas are needed, one or more resource agency approval is needed, personnel change, resource agency workload priorities may not align with the schedule, resource agencies may conflict over the project, resource agency approval may be delayed or not provided, new laws get created regarding credit establishment, fires, floods, drought, invasives, pandemic, nuclear warfare, no bidders on contract, and then I ran out of room. Hopefully, it is clear that credit establishment is more difficult than pursuit of credits from an existing in lieu fee program or bank. But will this deter us from pursuing credit establishment or any advanced mitigation project? Next. No, of course not. Our transportation projects need mitigation. The Advanced Mitigation Program gives Caltrans the opportunity to pursue mitigation for multiple transportation projects early on so that the roads, highways, and bridges that you use can be attended to as quickly as possible. Caltrans has multiple advanced mitigation projects in the delivery stage right now, shown here, some of which are pursuing existing credits and some are pursuing credit establishment. Right now, we have 4 advanced mitigation projects that have already been signed by the Caltrans director and are moving forward in the delivery phase, and 6 proposals that are following close behind, some of which have already received district approval by the time of this presentation and will move on to get Caltrans director approval. Then those advanced mitigation projects will get programmed as well. And looking at this slide, you should see that almost all Caltrans districts are represented here. You should also notice some common needs: wetlands, non-wetland waters, and riparian. These are not strange mitigation needs, right? There is some form of regulated water in every single Caltrans district within California, which means that every single district has transportation projects that impact waters and need mitigation for them. I cannot provide any more details than what is on this slide because someone somewhere is sadly not watching this presentation who may want to bid on any of these projects, and Caltrans is not legally allowed to give anyone a competitive edge. I hope everyone comes away from this presentation having a better understanding of the Advanced Mitigation Program and two of the allowable pathways in the delivery process. That concludes my presentation, and now back to Matt Derby for our first Q&A session. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen, for that very in-depth and informative presentation on the Advanced Mitigation Program and its process. Lots of great information for all of our session attendees today. And now let's move on to our first Q&A session to have audience members ask questions related to the content that Karen just highlighted on our Advanced Mitigation Program and its process, and have our panelists answer your questions. But first, a few instructions on how to participate in the Q&A session before we proceed. As you can see, we have some instructions that will be left on the screen during the Q&A session for you to follow to help ask a question. Again, you can use the raise your hand feature in WebEx, on the WebEx program, to ask a question. And then to submit questions, please select the appropriate icon. On your internet web browser, select the square box with the question mark in it. If your in your WebEx software, you can select the down arrow with the Q&A in it. And on your mobile app, select the circle with the 3 dots and then select the gray circle with the question mark. Our host team will read questions or comments out loud as they come in for panelist response. And again, if you've dialed in by phone, then please use the *3 command on your keypad to raise and lower your hand. Throughout the process, we will identify attendees to ask questions in the order that they are received. And as a reminder, if we are unable to answer any questions, or if we run out of time, we will follow up with all Q&A in writing after the meeting ends. Now, let's start our Q&A session. Who would like to be the first to ask a question? Any questions out there for Karen on the MP process and also the program? Oh, we have one that came in. Karen, it's, will Caltrans be paying for the establishment of an entire bank?
That's a good question. The answer is no. Caltrans will not be paying for the creation of an entire new bank. Caltrans can pay for the credits that their advanced mitigation projects need.
Perfect. Any other questions? Oh, here we go. Here's one from Tara Kress with CDFW. Does Caltrans have an idea of how long they would ideally hold on to advanced mitigation credits prior to transferring them to a specific project? Good question.
So there's no set time in how long we would hold on to the credits. We create these advanced mitigation projects with transportation projects already in mind. And so if all goes well, once we have purchased the pre-transfer credits, then we can do just an exercise in Steve to start applying those credits to the transportation projects once they receive their permits. We do need to make sure that we don't hang on to those advanced mitigation credits for years and years. If we end up in a situation where we find we accidentally purchased too many pre-transfer credits and we really can't see a need for them for transportation projects, then we can consider selling those extra pre-transfer credits to a local transportation agency.
Perfect. Thank you for that response. There is another question here. Are there examples? This is from Meg. Are there examples of scoring criteria? From Meg Henry at DOT.
I don't have one to share. They basically, the scoring criteria is not something that we would show to the public because it's something that we're going to develop internally, and it it's not going to have anything strange on there. It's going to be very, very specific to the needs of our advanced mitigation program and the specific advanced mitigation project. We're basically trying to make sure that whoever gets the contract that we have out for bid is going to be able to meet all of those needs and deliver the credits that we need in the time that we need them.
Okay, thank you for that response. We do have another question from Laura Herbal. She says, I understand it takes a while to update BEIs. Has anyone talked to the approving regulatory agencies about streamlining the process to make the approval process quicker?
Caltrans Advanced Mitigation Program does have contacts within each of the regulatory agencies, and we have had discussions about the process of getting BEIs amended, and they're ongoing. So yes, we are talking to them about it.
Great. Here's another question that came in from Rob Stanley. Rob asks, one of the talking points mentioned was a bank-related action that a CDFW Caltrans liaison could potentially assist with. What was that action? Could we go into finer detail on that one item?
So does that have to do with, I'm guessing that has to do with being on the non-voting, as being a non-voter in the contract. I'm looking for the question so I can make sure I answer it.
It's in the Q&A, and Rob Stanley sent it on over at 10:39 a.m. Unless Rob,
Oh, there we go. I see it. Okay.
if you want to further elaborate, that might also help out.
Or could potentially assist with. Well, I had the points that would help make the credit establishment process a success. So I had that list, which I'd have to look back in the presentation to, but basically it's that they're working together with the contractor and helping them to go through the process of establishing their credits. I mean, as far as a liaison specifically, that would have to do with a non-voting. I mean, okay, let me stand back. So Caltrans liaison, there are a number of things that the Caltrans liaisons can help us with. For one, they're going to be most likely involved in the transportation projects that will be benefiting from an advanced mitigation project. So right up front, we should be talking to those liaisons regarding those transportation projects that will be encompassed in an advanced mitigation project. So we should be talking to them at various points throughout an advanced mitigation project process. And then if it's a situation where we are going for credit establishment, then they will be involved as non-voting members regarding the actual contract or proposal review. So they may have some input, they may have some additional questions that they think we should ask the contractor, or they may have just some just background knowledge that could be helpful to us. So again, they can't vote, but they can give us some information, and that may help us to make a decision. But it will ultimately be Caltrans' decision who becomes the contractor. So hopefully that answered that question better.
Thanks for the response. We have another question from Craig Zeff. And let me see here. It just popped up. There we go. We have Craig's question back here. I'm sorry, the thing is toggling. There we go. Craig Zeff asks, how much risk is factored in? Example, if anything goes wrong in the creation of a bank, is there a backup plan in place?
The answer is there should be. So for every Caltrans project, whether it's a transportation project or an advanced mitigation project, we have what's called a risk register, in which we try to identify the potential risks to our projects and what our response could be. So for advanced mitigation projects, one of the risks is that we may not get the mitigation that we want, that we need, or we may not get it in time. And so we have responses to that, whether it's changing some wording in our contract. Maybe our contract, we realized, wasn't clear enough. Maybe we realized that we need to change the amount of credits we're pursuing because it's, for whatever reason, an unreasonable amount. There are a number of things that we can have as a response. But you're right, there definitely is a backup needed.
Okay, great. Thank you for that response. The next question that we have is from Marlene Tyner Valkencourt, and she asks, how long is the turnaround time between releasing an invitation for bid, selecting the mitigation provider, and closing on the existing credits?
Ooh, that's a good question. I should remember off the top of my head how long they go out for bid, but it's part of it is, as far as it being released and chosen, there is a set amount of time. And if there's somebody that's in DPAC that's on, then maybe you can put it in chat. I can't remember the exact amount of time. Since an invitation for bid is just for the lowest bidder, then that's a pretty quick decision. It's either whoever has the lowest bid and that's it. As far as closing, that can take a little bit more time depending on DPAC's workload, the banker or in lieu fee program's workload, and just making sure everything, all the paperwork is correct, and the credits are correct, the cost is correct, the permit numbers, everything that goes into a contract is correct. So that doesn't have a set amount of time, but it has not taken very long once a bidder is selected for just an invitation for bid. That's just going for credits that already exist.
And I think we will follow up with Marlene on the exact how long it takes the turnaround time. We'll make sure we follow up with her on that one to clarify that number. I think that is all of our questions. Tammy, did anybody have their hand up?
No hands.
Okay, perfect. With that, are there any last questions that anybody would like to ask Karen before we continue with the presentation? Okay, great. Okay, I think that concludes our quick Q&A session for this first round. And at this time, I would like to now introduce Stuart Kirkham, Acting Office Chief, to discuss the AMP program updates, including advanced mitigation account status. Stuart?
All right, thank you, and good morning to everybody. My name is Stuart Kirkham. I am the Acting Office Chief for the Office of Biological Science and Innovation at Caltrans headquarters, and I'm administer the Advanced Mitigation Program. And so what I want to present is kind of a financial report on where our account is now, but that is also related into our project delivery workload. And then to give an outlook on both for near-term project delivery and for the outlook for the next 10 years or so. And so the data we're showing here is for our advanced mitigation account. It is current as of February 28th of 2023. And at the start of the fiscal year, we had $123 million in the account. And so that is the base $120 million. That's at core deposits of $30 million that was required by law. And then some interest earned from our surplus money investment fund, Smith. And in terms of expenditures, to date, we've only had support costs expended, and they're coming in at about a little under $160,000. And thus far, we've not expended any capital. The reason for this is that capital cost would be what we would actually pay to whoever wins our contracts, and that would actually either buy the credits or implement a new mitigation project. And so the capital funds won't actually be expended until potentially a year or two after projects are awarded, and we're really just kind of in the early phases of project delivery. At this point, we have, as Karen mentioned earlier, we have 4 projects that have been awarded funds and have started into project delivery, and that's where you see those capital outlay support expenditures. But we also have 10 new projects that we already know the scope for, and these are going up for approval in a couple of weeks. And based on what we've actually have awarded to projects, and also based on the known scope of these projects, we have reserved we've reserved a little over half of our remaining balance in our account. So about we're showing $63 million. And that runs in at about 51% after these, and so you obviously go for about 49% for what is waiting to be reserved. After these projects are approved, we expect to see that to be more around 60-40. 60% encumbered and reserved for projects, and 40% waiting to be assigned for projects. And the current trends that we're seeing, we had been hoping to get our first capital expenditures in this fiscal year. However, due to some contracting issues, that hasn't happened, and it may not happen this fiscal year. We're seeing a major shift away from just doing planning towards actual project delivery. Karen mentioned that earlier. You can see in this chart down in the bottom right-hand corner, if you start tracing this over the years that the program has been active, Once we have RAMNAs, that allows the districts to nominate projects through project initiation proposals, or PIPs. And then once PIPs get approved, the districts then produce a more detailed project document, describing the cost, scope, and schedule of the advanced mitigation project in more details. A document's called a project initiation document, or a PID. And so they tend to occur in the sequence of RAMNA, then a PIP, then a PID. And that PID document is then what goes on to the director to be approved to get funding from the advanced mitigation account, and then go into delivery. And so you can see that over time, the RAMNAs have, ramped up from 1 to 2 to 5, and then kind of maxed out at 6, and then have, and that would be for this fiscal year. We're anticipating maybe 4 more next fiscal year. And so that they've kind of peaked out and are leveling off. And as we saw in the maps earlier, we are at the point, next week we're actually having our public meeting for District 11's RAMNA, and that will give us RAMNAs in pretty much in each of our districts, with the exception of District 12. But the District 7 RAMNA it's just Orange County, and so the District 7 RAMNA, its regional boundaries overlapped it quite a bit, and so we do currently have the ability to propose advanced mitigation projects in each of our districts. And you can see that as that, in this trend between the PIPs and then followed by the PIDs, that as we got more and more RAMNAs in place, that the number of advanced mitigation projects that were being proposed has been going up, almost geometrically over time. And so we're seeing more projects, and so the focus of our efforts is shifting more towards project delivery. By the end of this fiscal year, as I mentioned before, we anticipate being at about a 60-40 split, 60% reserved and 40% remaining revenue. And as we'll see in some of the upcoming slides, what we anticipate based on the average cost of projects is that we will have all of the funds encumbered next fiscal year. And in fact, we'll have a backlog of projects. And then we're really not expecting to get our first repayments coming back in until next fiscal year. Next slide, please. Right, so for a quick explanation of what you're seeing, on the right-hand side is a stacked bar chart with a couple of lines imposed on it. And to kind of give you an interpretation, the yellow bars represent capacity in our advanced mitigation account, that is funds that have not been assigned to a project yet. The gray bars represent funds that have been reserved for projects, for advanced mitigation projects, that is. The orange bars are anticipated expenditures, and those expenditures are based on the project documents that the districts have submitted, and it provides a list of the potentially benefiting transportation projects. It gives the list of when, or list of dates when we expect that they will need their credits, and then the amount and the cost of the credits. And so based on that schedule, we modeled when we anticipate those expenses to actually occur. And then the blue bars represent represent the revenues coming in from transportation projects having bought credits. Green line represents the actual money that is in the account, and so it's everything from what's reserved, from revenues coming in and remaining capacity. Everything but the expenditures, basically. And then the red line represents what we can plan for in the future, what we can plan against, what we can plan new projects against. And so we're in the third bar right now. This is the fiscal year that we're working on. And this is representing the number of projects that we're expecting to have delivered by the end of this fiscal year. And so we're looking, by the end of this fiscal year, we're looking at 10 projects total being approved and receiving funds. And this would also include the reservation, the gray bar would also include 4 additional PIPs. Where they haven't gone for approval, but we're reserving funds for them. And so by the end of this fiscal year, this is that 60-40 split I was talking about 60% being reserved and 40% waiting for encumbrance. You know, we had been anticipating just a little bit of revenues coming in from our first project, purchasing some credits, and this been running into contracting issues, and so this may not actually happen this fiscal year. They get pushed off to some later fiscal year. In the next fiscal year, and so we're anticipating this fiscal year having 10 program projects. There's 10 projects that are funded from the Advanced Mitigation account, and then a spillover of 4 additional PIPs that will eventually be approved in the 23-24 fiscal year, represented by this 4th bar. Now, during that fiscal year, during next fiscal year, we're expecting 11 PIDs to be submitted to our program for approval. But we only think that we're going to have enough capacity in the program to fund about 7 of them. And so we're anticipating having an overage of about 4 projects. And we've been projecting this. We haven't actually seen these PIPs and PIDs haven't been produced, these future ones, so we don't know how much they will actually cost yet. But we've been estimating it based on the average cost of all the projects we've seen so far. And it's not just an average of the cost, but we're also looking at the average of when we expect their expenditures to occur and also when we expect the revenues to come in. And so we produce like a statistically average project, and then we have used that to plan everything, to produce this graph and try and get a sense of what program behavior will look like. And so we're anticipating 11 PIDs in the next fiscal year, 23-24 fiscal year, and then there'll be a spillover of 2 PIDs into 24-25. We haven't planned for the 24-25 fiscal year yet, but those 2 that will spill over will have their funds encumbered next fiscal year, and so we'll have a surplus of about 4 to 6 projects, and that surplus won't get cleared until about the 25-26 fiscal year, and that's where you see the capacity start to recover again. And so as the funds come in that allow us to program new projects, we'll get to the point to where we start having a surplus of funds. And then every year that we have revenues coming in, that adds to that surplus. Now this shows that surplus then recovering, over a 10-year period up to that initial $120 million. This is probably not actually going to happen in reality. Because and so this graph is just based on what we have planned so far. And we've only planned through next fiscal year. And so what will actually happen in reality is that as these revenues come in, we're probably going to plan new projects against them. And so to try and model what that will look like and get a more realistic picture, if we could go to the next slide, please. What we think will actually happen looks more like this graph that we have on the right. And so we're going to expand as we get revenues coming in over, after we get that first backlog of projects filled and cleared, then as we get revenues coming in, these blue bars will get programmed into new advanced mitigation projects. And again, we've been using that statistical average project to kind of plan this. And so, we anticipate then that, the capacity is going to really kind of, bottom out, essentially. And what's interesting, though, is that as we, also project when we have the encumbrances and the time that it takes to get a contract out, because that lag time between where we just have the capital outlay support costs, which tend to come in at, hundreds of thousands of dollars, versus when we have those capital expenses, which, as I mentioned, to get the contracts out could take a year or more, that we tend to hold a lot of those funds in reserve. And so what we're seeing over time, as we've modeled it out, is that the amount of money that we have in the account at any one time is typically going to stick around $100 million. But most of that, around $70 million, we expect to be, reserved for projects coming up. And so once this, once we get that first backlog cleared, we kind of expect things to kind of settle down to where we have about maybe $25 million in the account from one year to the next, against which we can plan new projects. And then based on, in this chart on the bottom left corner, kind of shows you, again, based on our statistically average project, which is about $6.3 million, that we can anticipate maybe around 4 new projects each fiscal year. Once we get these new projects that are going to go to our steering committee in a couple of weeks for approval, that average cost may go up because we've been seeing seeing projects that are above that average cost. And so that this overall number may change. And so it may be maybe 3 projects per year, but we anticipate that it may go around 25. Now, a big caveat for this is that it's all contingent on our advanced mitigation projects being successful in creating mitigation or acquiring mitigation, and that that we have that mitigation available, and that our transportation projects use it and pay it back. If we're not able to have transportation projects pay us back, then basically you're going to see like all these bars kind of track down towards 0, which would be a bad situation for our program. But at this point, this graph on the right is ideally what we're kind of anticipating and what we're gearing our planning towards. And with that, I believe that concludes my portion of the presentation. So I think I shall hand it back to Matt for our next round of questions and answers.
Thanks, Stuart, for that update. Now, this opens up our Q&A session number 2 for any questions related to the AMP program update or the advanced mitigation account status, those items that Stuart just covered, or if you have any additional questions also for Karen that you might have thought of. But let's open up our lines for that. And again, you can use your raise your hand feature on the WebEx program to ask a question. And then as a reminder to submit questions, please select the appropriate icon on your internet browser, select the square box with the question mark in it. In your WebEx software, select the down arrow with the Q&A. And on your mobile app, select the circle with the 3 dots, and then select the gray circle with the question mark in it. Again, our host team will read the questions and comments out loud for panelist response. And if you've dialed in on the phone, please remember to use the *3 command on your keypad to raise and lower your hand, and we can get the questions in that way. So at this time, who would like to start us off with questions for Stuart's session? Or if you have any lingering questions from the first session, let's start that off and enter it into the Q&A or raise your hand. I think one question has come in, Stuart. How much does the average advanced mitigation project cost?
Currently, the average cost is around $6.3 million. But that, as I mentioned earlier, that is likely to go up, I imagine, because with our current round of projects that are going up for approval in a couple of weeks, we've been seeing several that are that the total cost is well above that threshold, and so that's likely to go up in the future. But as of the end of February, when our data was for, it was around 6.3 million.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that response. We do have another question of how is it possible that support costs have been spent, but no capital funds have yet been spent?
All right. That gets into essentially our contracting process. And so, if we go back to Karen's presentation, and it showed those various steps when it got into project delivery, and there was the orange guy at the computer. That is really represents, thank you for that slide. That really represents our project delivery process. And so once the funds get awarded to our districts to deliver the project, they'll have to go through their environmental document phase, which, for these projects can often be done fairly quickly, after which they have to put together a service contract, and that, one, it takes a while to do that paperwork, plus it has to be submitted to DPAC, the Division of Procurements and Contracts, and, that process takes time. And then that contract has to go out for bid. We have to get the bidders in. We have to go through that approval process. And then it's after that contract gets awarded and that, based on the terms of the contract, at what point that we make payments to the contractor, that's when we have the capital expenses. And so there can be a significant lag time between when the funds are awarded and when we see those capital expenditures. And then in the meantime, the district staff is doing all that paperwork, to support that contract going out. And that is what gets reflected as the capital outlay support. And so typically we'll see, low level of charges for the support up until the point that the contracts will go out and that we'd actually secure the mitigation. And we're still fairly early in our program. And it hasn't been that long since we funded our first project, which was in District 8 to buy desert tortoise credits in the Mojave Desert. And so we're really just kind of getting that threshold now to where we're getting our first contracting going. And so that's essentially why. It's a process. It takes a while, and we'll see the capital expenditures at the point that we actually secure the mitigation.
Great. That was a great response. Thank you for that. And then we do have another question. What happens if an advanced mitigation project, if an advanced mitigation project cannot pay back the program?
All right. Well, technically, it's not the advanced mitigation project that pays back the program. It's the transportation projects that use the credits. But that does represent kind of a worst case scenario for our program because we're not going to be given any more funds by the legislature. And so the only way that we can sustain our program and to deliver more projects is if we have the funds come back in. And so there are 2 points of risk that can create this situation where we don't get payments coming back in. One is that the advanced mitigation project fails to secure the mitigation, and so that can come about from issues for instance with if we're buying existing credits that the bank is not able to amend its instrument in time, or maybe we don't even get bidders. Or if it's for creation, and again, use the example of a bank that maybe there's issues that crop up that keep the bank from being approved. And so there's that situation to where we just never end up with the credits to begin with. The second point of risk is that maybe we do get the credits, but then there are maybe issues that crop up with the transportation projects that are wanting to use the credits from a program that for instance, they might do all their mitigation through avoidance and minimization and not need the credits, or that for some reason maybe they fell outside of the service area, or for some reason that the resource agencies don't feel like our advanced mitigation credits would be appropriate for that project, and so they don't approve that transportation project using the credits. So those are some of the situations that I think could occur that could create this situation. But again, what would be bad, what would end up for the program, the implications for the program is that our overall revenue that we could invest in future projects would decline over time, and that would give us less purchasing power.
Great information. Thank you. We do have another question that came in through the chat. Vivian Ho at DOT. She asks, for both panelists, Do you foresee the advanced mitigation model being applied to other resources outside of biological? From my understanding of the legislation, that would not be permitted under this particular program. Is that correct? So either Karen or
I'll field that question. Yeah, there has been a lot of talk about this model being applied. Some topics that have come up have been related to mitigating for greenhouse gas emissions, for increasing sequestration for carbon dioxide. Also, there has been some interest in trying to mitigate for vehicle miles traveled. But the legislation is very specific in terms of what instruments that we can invest in for advanced mitigation, and so it's mitigation banks, which are specific to the Clean Water Act. It is conservation banks, which are specific to the California and Federal Endangered Species Act. It's NCCPs or ACPs, which again are species specific, and RCIS and MCAs, which are for conservation for natural resources. And so they are, what we're able to spend our money on is pretty much limited to biological and natural resource type impacts at this time. But the model could be used. It might take legislation in order to be able to do that. But at this point, our funds could not be invested in those activities.
Great, thank you for that response. We do have another question that's come in from Julie Maddox. He asked, are the specific dollar amounts encumbered project available to the public?
I'm not quite sure I fully understand the questions, but I'm thinking that she means is are we disclosing how much the encumbrances are? And if we're going to be publishing that specific to specific advanced mitigation projects, that's something I don't think that we currently have not posted that information. I mean, we at this point we've just been kind of happy that we actually have projects that are getting the funds reserved. But that is something that we could potentially do. I think we would wait until the projects are actually approved by the director, because otherwise it's still kind of up in the air. I think our group should discuss this internally and then come to a decision on it. But currently, no, we don't have that information available, but it is something that we could potentially do.
Perfect. Thank you for that response. I think we have another question here from Adam at DOT. It says, hi, Stuart or Karen. Can you speak on a typical strategy for developing a credit release schedule within the RFP? Should we be requesting all funds up front or based upon individual transportation project needs?
I'll take this one. So that's a very good question, because even in District 8, we were a little confused about that at first. But in the end, we are not developing, Caltrans is not developing a release schedule, because in the end, it's Army Corps that put out the template for all of the bankers to use for release schedules. And those schedules can be changed amongst the resource agencies if they decide to update that template at any time, but Caltrans cannot decide when those releases will be. All we do is just say in our RFP, how many, what type and how many of the types of the credits that we need based on those individual transportation projects. So just like that example I gave earlier where I said we needed the 20 species credits, and I said, let's pretend they're distributed over 4 transportation projects. Those 4 transportation projects all have different construction schedules, which means they're all going to be getting their permits at different times, which means their mitigation is all needed at different times. So all we're going to do in our RFP is just say what we need and when we need it by, and leave it to the contractor to figure it out as far as release schedules. So maybe in the end, the contractor makes a bank that's, 300 acres large, but we still only need those 20 credits, and we still only need them at, so much at certain times. So that way it gives, there is flexibility there for a contractor to develop, whatever size bank or in lieu fee program that they want. But in the end, we just need those specific credits at specific times, and that's it.
Perfect. Thank you for the response.
Adam, I see your hand raised. I'm going to unmute your line in case you have more to add to your questions. Oh,
Okay.
mine, you lowered your hand.
Oh, we do have one other question here to round us out. There was a good outlook shown in the 2025 to 2035 budget slide, but what about the near future? How many advanced mitigation projects are coming up this year and next year that you can share with us?
I'll take that question. For this fiscal year, we're anticipating having 6 more for a total of 10 advanced mitigation projects that are funded, at least and are starting into their advanced mitigation process. And then in next fiscal year, that's a little bit up in the air. We're anticipating getting essentially, up to 13 applications in, but we're really only going to be, as we're anticipating, based on, again, on the average project cost, maybe 7 of those approved in next fiscal year. And then, with a backlog of 4 that might not get cleared until 25-26 fiscal year.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so do we have any other questions for Karen or Stuart before we move on? Please raise your hand or submit your question into the chat and we can get that addressed. Okay, I think that wraps up our Q&A session number 2. So we'll move on to our next slide. Okay, and that brings us into our last slide here. So on behalf of Caltrans, thank you for participating in today's webinar. Your input is very important to us to improve the annual mitigation program meeting and to add any additional topics for future presentations. But as a reminder, before you leave the webinar today, please remember that we have an online questionnaire for all attendees to fill out. Please click the link in the chat to answer that questionnaire. It's going to be very important for you to provide your feedback on today's webinar and to provide us some input on future presentations. And again, we appreciate you taking time to learn more about the program and providing your feedback and staying involved with the Advanced Mitigation Program. You can also visit Caltrans Advanced Mitigation website at advancedmitigation.dot.ca.gov. And remember, of all those great resources on the website that Karen mentioned earlier in the presentation, or you can email the program at advanced.mitigation And as a reminder, please do take our online questionnaire. On behalf of Caltrans, thanks again for attending today's session, and please enjoy the rest of your day and have a great weekend coming up. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.